I'm KS Garner, and you're listening to the Solo Nerd Podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with the comic creator and artist of the It's a Horror Show comic series, Jade Lowder, here to promote the Kickstarter for the comic's second issue, The Date. Welcome, Jade.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today.
Well, thank you for joining us here today. But outside my introduction, who is Jade Lowder in his own words?
Oh man. Yeah, so who is Jade Lowder? I am an artist and comic book creator. I teach at Montana State University, and I teach drawing and different classes and stuff like that. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now. I have 2 degrees in painting, and so I kind of come from a fine arts background, but pretty much my entire life, I've always made comics. In some level, and comics have always kind of been a part of my practice, whether that's just unconsciously or subconsciously filtering into my paintings or whatever. But in the last 2 years, it's actually kind of funny. I had like a student once who told me, Jade, did you always want to be an art teacher? And my honest answer was no. I actually wanted to be a comic book artist before I went down the road of being a professor. And that started me thinking, what if I got back into comics? And so, yeah, about 2 years ago, I started the kind of journey of rediscovering this part of myself that I hadn't really given, very serious focus to since I was a kid. So now I kind of like lead with I'm a comic book artist because that's become my major focus of my art practice. But it hasn't been for 10 plus years of me working as a painter and showing my work, in galleries and kind of having that as a focus. And now getting back to comics feels like I'm reintroducing myself to a part of me that has been lost or something like that. And yeah, so that's maybe a little a little heavy or a little deep for just an intro, but that's who I am.
Well, what is It's a Horror Show, I guess the series as a whole about, and then what should new readers expect? What should returning readers expect with The Date, and what should new readers know about the series?
Yeah, sure. So it's an anthology horror series. So each issue is kind of self-contained right now. There's not like an overarching narrative that spans from one issue to the next issue. Each are their own kind of thing. It's a Horror Show is kind of born out of my love of just horror and horror comics, but specifically like campy, goofy, over the top horror. And so that's kind of what It's a Horror Show is really about, is these kinds of ideas where I take a really simple, character and I flip it on its head in some way. And I try and make something that's not expected for traditional kind of horror narratives. It's mostly like a joke or something like that that's like kind of at the heart of it that I find really funny, and that kind of propels the rest of the story. Mm-hmm. So the first issue I did was just a mini comic, and it was kind of centered around this idea of these college kids going to a cabin in the woods and the killer showing up, but instead of him immediately kind of like doing what he's there to do, the college kids start critiquing his ensemble, like his outfit and like how he shows up. And so they start like kind of tearing him down, and he does like a mini fashion show where he shows off like the different outfits that are possible for him to wear. And all the while I'm making kind of commentary on horror tropes and stuff like that. And then at the very end, he kind of gets fed up with these college kids and does what he was there to do, murders them all. And one final, kid, as he's like, gurgling with blood, kind of points up at him and says, "Now that's scary. Someone who doesn't care what other people think." And so it's that kind of stuff that I'm trying to kind of like pull into the comic, where it's humor, but it's also kind of a vague critique of horror tropes and ideas and stuff like that, kind of putting on its head. It's all pretty tongue in cheek. And so The Date is its own issue. It's its own thing. And it's born of this idea of this kind of rock star werewolf who's this punk rocker werewolf that I kind of made up, and it was drawing in just like a little one-off thing before I even started this project. And I just love drawing this character so much that I was like, I think it'd be fun to do a full book just about him, and just to see where that story could kind of go. And so that's how the date was kind of born. And from there, it was I love the idea of doing a goofy romance, and I wanted to kind of like play with that. And so I did this kind of goofy romance where this werewolf meets this kind of damsel in distress, but she's not all she's not all really damsel. She's much, she too is also kind of a monster. And I wanted to kind of do that, again, kind of something unexpected, where you're expecting the kind of hero damsel trope and then flip it on its head and do something totally different. And so that's kind of what the date is in a nutshell about. And so there's punk rock, there's monsters, there's hot rods, there's all kinds of stuff that I think just make for like a hell of a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. So, excuse me, could you I guess elaborate a little bit more on your creative process for It's a Horror Show? So you say, you've been doing comics your entire life, but in the last couple of years is when you really got into it and be like, hey, I'm actually going to create them and put them out into the world, right?
Yeah.
So like when I say creative process, I mean like, character development, storylines, world building, and has it changed anyway from issue 1 to issue 2?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that if anything has changed from issue 1 to issue 2 is issue 1 was never really, I never saw it going anywhere. It was just kind of a one-off funny idea. And then I got to working on this werewolf book, and I thought, like, it would be really fun if like it was an anthology series, and I just kind of kept going with this, the idea of It's a Horror Show and building that out. So the kind of like difference in the process was really like that. The first one was just this one-off simple idea. I really had no idea if it was going to have legs or if I wanted to keep pursuing it. And then by the time I started writing the kind of second book, it was its own thing as well, but it felt like it fit tonally to what I was doing in the first book. And so, a little kind of more insight into the process. I think as a like a fine arts painter, my work is a lot about place and identity and some fairly introspective kind of things. And so when I moved back into comics, I wanted to just have fun. I didn't want to have to pull something deep and out from the recesses of my mind that really connected with myself. What I wanted to do was just tell stories that I thought were funny, that I thought were fun, and it was a part of my personality that I couldn't really use in my paintings, but I could do it in comics. I could tell these funny stories. I could make my friends laugh and stuff like that. So the books that I've decided to work on and focus on are that. They're mostly like kind of pulp genre fiction stuff that just makes me laugh and that I'm just super into, but I don't have an outlet in the kind of quote unquote like serious painting kind of world to be able to do. So the process really is simply like starting off with just a core idea of will this make me laugh? Will someone else find this funny? And usually it's like a phone call between my brother and me, because he and I we're pretty close in age, and we kind of grew up together, and we grew up just making each other laugh. And so I'll call him and pitch, like I'll run an idea by him. And if he laughs, I'm like, okay, I'm onto something. And then I'll start flushing that idea out. And then if I call him and he just it's like crickets, I'm like, okay, maybe I dropped that one. Maybe that one doesn't have anything. So he's kind of like a sounding board, honestly, for my process of just like writing. And writing is something that I feel like I'm kind of newer at, simply because when you're painting, you're not having to really do that. You're just making these pictorial images, and then they speak for themselves often. And in comics, having to be the kind of like director, the writer, all these kind of like different avenues of putting the thing together, I've had to really think about how I want to tell stories, and the kind of stories that I just get excited about. And I think that for me, that again, kind of like all sinks back to this idea of just making stories that make people laugh, and contain elements that like other horror fans and other geeks like me would probably be really into.
Well, were you surprised that, especially in the first issue, that people actually liked it? Because you said you weren't planning on going anywhere with it. And now people are reading it, and did anyone ask like, hey, are you going to do a follow-up on this? Or it was more of you wanted to do a follow-up on it?
Yeah, it was surprising. I don't know. Like, I kind of made them for me, and like I said, kind of for like a select group of people I thought would get a kick out of them. And when I started kind of putting them out there, really simply just kind of distributing them locally, and then a little bit of online kind of like distribution. And then I started getting feedback of people asking like, oh, when are you going to do the next one? When's the next full one? And stuff like that. Because the first issue was a mini, and they just wanted more. And then it got me thinking that I could probably do a follow-up to this, and that would be fun. And I think that like more than anything, it kind of let me know that I don't know if it was like I'm on the right direction so much as it was, oh, people are at least enjoying this and are also getting a kick out of it. And so let me give them something else to laugh at and to kind of enjoy in that way.
So when you started, illustrating the comics and writing them, and you've been reading them for pretty much, like you said, your whole life, right? So when you started actually, drawing everything out and writing thing out, did you compare it to what you normally read, or like, because you know how the climate changes and the culture changes probably like every 3, 4, 5 years. So what you wrote or like what you read 5 years ago may not fly now. So how was it entering into a field that like is changing all the time?
Yeah, like so when I kind of had my reawakening, I guess, for like lack of a better word, I kind of went just hog wild and started recollecting and getting new issues of things that I thought were really exciting and that were contemporary stuff that was coming out right now, going back to comic book shops in a big way to kind of read up. And so there was probably a 6-month period where all I did was just kind of like toil away with no aspirations of ever showing anything of what I was doing, but just reading and practicing without, I had been practicing and drawing and painting for, like I said, like 10 years. But as a kind of a fine artist and teaching drawing and all that kind of stuff. So I had like chops, but when you apply them to comics, there's a different translation between fine art and comics in a way, like the language of just drawing and whatnot. So it took me a while to kind of like brush back up on some of that stuff that I had kind of put away, and then also to start assimilating and bringing in those sources that I was starting to gather in that kind of 6-month period of rediscovering comics. And so some of those, things were definitely like Scotty Young and Jorge Corona's Middle West was probably one of the first books that I picked up, and it like blew my mind in terms of just it's not just its humor, but its art style. Like Jorge Corona is probably one of my favorite cartoonists right now, and there was something about a style that just felt like I'd never seen anything like it before. It felt so fresh and so kind of goofy at the same time. And it definitely isn't the kind of stuff that I've been reading, my entire life. But yeah, so there was definitely this big period of me like pulling in new resources and new comic book artists like Adrian Tomino was a big one. Who else was in that? And then there's artists that I blank on the names, but like the book Vinyl, there was a comic called Rumble, and that was like the art style. And that one really kind of like scratched an itch in my brain. Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff that I just started kind of like pulling in that period that ended up showing me, oh, I could be a lot looser. I could try different stuff. Paul Pope was a big one as well that like showed me I could be much more playful in terms of just like line work and stuff like that. So yeah, but you're totally right that like from what I was reading and whatnot to what's kind of hot right now, or what's kind of like the most kind of contemporary, there was like a little bit of a learning curve to relearn some of that stuff and think about what is going on now.
So you being not only the creator of It's a Horror Show, the series, so you're like the writer and the illustrator for it. So was that, to do everything yourself, was that like a financial thing, or was that more of an artistic thing for you? Like you aren't ready to kind of work with anybody yet, or was it more of just a money thing?
It was more just I don't think it was necessarily either or. I think that so right now, from like at Lesser Known Comics, who's publishing It's a Horror Show, I'm working with Mark Bernal, who's the kind of head honcho of Lesser Known Comics. And he and I are actually working on a book together right now as well, where he wrote it and I'm drawing it. So more so than anything, where I live in Montana, there is just not a comic community. It doesn't exist. In my town, it's me and that's it. And so like, it's more of, there's just nobody here. There's just nobody for me to work with yet. So as I like branch out and my network of people in the comics world kind of grows, I am starting to want to partner with this person and that person and think about that. I always kind of like first see myself as an illustrator first. Writer and kind of creator was kind of secondary, but it felt natural because as a painter and as an artist, I've been kind of doing everything myself for years. So it felt natural to just, okay, I'm going to do everything and I'm just going to put something out. It just kind of was second nature out of necessity versus any kind of actual like plan. It's just like, I have to do it. This is how it has to go. So I'm going to do it. But I definitely want to work with more people. And, like I said, in this project I'm working on with Mark, it's so much fun to like kick ideas back and forth with someone than just kind of doing it yourself sometimes, because you can rework something to death on your own. But when you're working with somebody else, that has that ability to edit and say, oh no, I don't like that, or oh yes, I do like that, then you're not going over it a million times and reworking something. You can just like, okay, moving on to the next thing. And so it's a lot faster in a way than just doing it on your own, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, you don't kick ideas back and forth to yourself? Am I the only one that talks to myself? Like, I don't think that's going to work. Well, no, if you do it like this, well, no.
I definitely do that as well. I don't know that I wanted to come off, as as Buck Wild is just like looking in a mirror and talking to myself in my studio. But that definitely happens where I'm working out ideas and maybe something's just not as succinct as I want it to be, or I don't think that something is like, maybe it's a layout or something like that. I don't know how many times I'll just redo a full page and I'll just pull it and say, nope, do it again. See if the next one becomes a little bit better. But when you have like a writing partner who is also like kind of acting as a cheerleader in a way as well, I'd be like, oh dude, this is awesome, I love what's going on here. That like motivates me to be like, oh, okay, I was second guessing it, but if he likes it, I'm all in. Like that's good. So having someone who's also kind of like operating that way, and I think that's what's so great about Mark is he's really good at just like championing creators and whatnot and saying, oh man, this is great, and giving really great compliments. It's not all just, compliments. A lot of it is like feedback on how to make something better. But I think that he's so good at like finding the balance between that I think it's so much smoother sometimes than working with myself, where I think I'm my own. I think everybody's their own worst critic, right? And I definitely fall into that of being pretty hard on myself. When I look back at like maybe a page I redid, I'm like, this was fine. I didn't have to do it 3 times.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. But what advice would you offer to other creators you wish someone would have told you when you first started, or even during your process of It's a Horror Show, the series?
Oh man. That's really tough. I feel like I'm just getting my legs under me. And so it's tough for me to have necessarily like a piece of advice. I guess as a teacher, I can offer some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, you just even as a comic book fan, as a teacher, or what you're doing now as a writer and working with a publisher, even with lesser known comics. So something that I guess, or even just working with a Kickstarter, like how is that going? So
oh man, Kickstarter. I feel like I'm just, I'm not very good at Kickstarter yet. I feel like I'm still getting, again, my feet under me with that one. I think in terms of like just either being a comic book artist or trying to put your stuff out there, a piece of advice that was given to me from a creator that I really like, and I think it was super helpful. One of them was like, do something small. Start with a small idea. Don't start with like a giant graphic novel or a 12-issue arc story or something like that. Make something small and then just start getting it out there. Because I think that was something that I was doing, is like I was kind of toiling away and working on a project that before It's a Horror Show, and it ended up sucking up so much time, and there wasn't a lot of like growth from one issue to the next issue, and I couldn't see myself kind of like out of that one and how I could develop it any further. And as soon as I made It's a Horror Show, the kind of mini, and I started putting it out into people's faces and stuff like that, more positive stuff kind of started happening by just making something small and getting it out the door. And so I think that would be like a huge piece of advice, is in just getting started, don't think of something, your magnum opus that is going to, be this thing that's going to take you years and years to create. Just make something like small and doable, get it out the door so that you can get some people following you and into what you're doing, so that people can pay you to then make that magnum opus. So you're not doing it, without that kind of like fan base or the motivation of just having other people into your stuff at that point. And then the other piece of advice that I really liked was just make the work that you want to make and put it out there, and there will be an audience. And so like, just make what you want to make. Don't worry about trying to make it what someone else is going to like or what you think fans might be into. Make what you want to make and put it out there. And I think that that's been really great, as a more of just kind of like doubled down on, this is making me laugh. A select group of people that I know are going to be into this. They get a kick out of it. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm onto something then. And then I put it out there. And I think that has been a really great, model, instead of just trying to make something that is pleasing to everybody, which you're never going to do. Like, that won't happen. So kind of make it for yourself, and there will be an audience. And I think that's, so those two pieces, for at least for as a creator, comic creator standpoint, I've been really following. And then I think my last one, that would be for anybody who wants to kind of be in the arts. And I was given this in high school, this piece of advice, and I've kind of like always like used it and thought about it. That so the advice is, if you can do or think about doing anything else other than arts, go do that thing, because arts require 150 billion% dedication to them. And if you're not willing to give it that attention and that kind of like seriousness in your life, you're better off, with your pursuits doing other things.
Mhm.
And I think that like I've always thought about that of, whether or not it's one endeavor or another thing, do I actually care about this? And do I actually want to like, plant a flag here and say, this is super important to me. And if I don't, then I know it's time to move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've never heard of it like framed that way, but me being a writer myself and doing podcasts and like pretty much doing everything myself, that's more of a financial thing for me. Yeah, I pretty much give my like 110, 20,000% of my time and energy into what
Yeah.
I do. And I mean, I've done other things, but I've always come back to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I figure, but I never gave it a whole lot of my time and energy because I just didn't have any left, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, just pursuing full time, I really don't have a choice but to give it 1,000% in a
Mm-hmm.
way. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I've never had it framed that way before. But throughout this whole process for you, it can be like when you first started doing It's a Horror Show, during, how you feeling currently now, or even just if you put it to the side, like you have all of that down packed, like you have Mark to help you,
Mm-hmm.
you're working on your second story and maybe even the third in your mind right now. But like, do you or did you ever get overwhelmed with anything, right? Especially with, you're a teacher and, juggling with that all day, and then your home life, and then bills, and then house, car, relationships, even trying to get some time for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it ever become too much? And how do you typically manage your mental well-being when it does?
Oh yeah, that's great. So the other kind of side of like my creative endeavors and whatnot, I'm actually a part of a nonprofit in Bozeman. I've been serving as the president of the board of the directors for a nonprofit called Compassion Project, and we're an arts and well-being organization. And so like what we do is we teach empathy and kindness through arts and mindfulness practices, and a lot of that is work on self-care and thinking about that. And so I've been a part of this organization for about 4 years now, and as a result of being a part of that for so long, self-care has been like become just not just a buzzword, but like a practice, like a thing that I live by, of carving out that time and making sure that I'm taking care of my mental well-being. So whether or not that's going to therapy, which has been amazing, it's been really, really great to be able to talk with someone, get some strategies for dealing with anxiety. Because yeah, you're right, being a teacher, being an artist, having a home life, having bills, all that kind of stuff, like being an art teacher, I'm not breaking the bank. I'm skating by most months, and then on top of that, like, yeah, I have a wife, I have some cats, and I have friends and people I want to spend time with, and family and all that kind of stuff. And that takes up a fair amount of time and stressors and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think for me, my well-being, things that really help would be therapy. It's great. It's a carving out an hour a week to talk, to just go over what's been bugging me, or work on some things to help me with like manage my anxiety and whatnot, are amazing. As well as I think just I've learned what self-care looks like for me, and self-care is different for everybody, right? And so for some people that's literally just taking a nap, that's like a bubble bath or whatever. But for me, I've learned that something that like really does that for me is going to record stores and just looking through records. I'm a pretty avid collector, and so for me, just flipping through stacks and stacks of records, I can feel like my heart rate just like calm down. I'm just in this cataloging brain. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm shutting everything else out of the world. And I'm just looking through stacks and stacks of records. And there's something that's just so soothing about that, that like, it gives me just, an hour or however long I'm in, this or that record shop, just gives me a little bit of time to myself. And I feel like that helps me really manage, so that when I come back out of that moment and I'm like jump back into teaching mode or family mode or whatever, I've given myself just a little bit of time and a little bit of space just for me. And then I can give other people, my attention again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you go to record stores just to flip through the records, right? Is it maybe the act of touching something and just having something in your hands, possibly? Because everything nowadays is just through a screen, right? So the act of actually touching things, like even with shopping for clothes, just going to the mall and actually feeling the fabric of the clothes and putting the clothes on versus just ordering them online. So maybe the act of touching something may help with some anxiety you may have, or is
that's probably, you're probably right on with that. I think too, when I was a little kiddie in school and whatnot, or just even in high school or college, or for that matter, like I always had to just be doodling. I just had to like be touching the paper in some way and doodling. And even when I try and sit still, like my hands are just like going, like, like I can't not like be moving my hands. It just doesn't work. And so, forever, I've always been a very kind of tactile person. So I mean, you're probably totally right. I don't like buy records online. I don't like really look at music like digitally at all. I prefer to like, flip through stacks of vinyl. And I think you're probably right. It's definitely a tactile thing. Yeah.
Well, my last question for you, Jade, is what is your idea of success? So I asked that because as creators, if we're not getting regular paychecks from a full-time job or making consistent revenue from our art, we're considered failures, or we'll consider ourselves failures. Many of us will put our dreams and project on the back burner or give them up altogether because this career path can be highly intimidating and competitive. So what is your idea of quote unquote success?
Man, it's rough. I had this conversation with my students all the time about like this idea of the success in arts. And, oftentimes for them, they have these ideas of like, oh, I want to be supported just by making my art, or I want, my stuff in this or that gallery. And that's when I'll know I've made it and all that kind of stuff. And I think the idea of success is such like a capitalistic kind of thing. It's like, man, if you're not being productive, if you're not making the most of every hour of your day, you're slacking. And sometimes I feel like it's so ingrained in us, right, that it's kind of a bummer. And so I think success for me is just, I'm experiencing a level of it now, of that kind of success of, I get to make comics. I'm not currently super worried about bills and stuff. Like my teaching is I'm doing good right now. Like I'm at a good place right now. I'm able to make comics. I can make what I want to make. I am starting to get my stuff out there. I think that anymore it would look like being able to give more time to comics and more time to being that kind of creator would feel successful to me. And I think versus any kind of monetary or fame or anything like that, I think for me, it would just be being able to shift my time a little bit more, being able to shift more of my time to being a creator, making more comics and stuff like that, versus having to worry about paying the bills. I think that for me would feel like like success. And without being, too much like the little kid version of me would be like, I want to be at a Comic-Con and I want to have a table right next to like my heroes. That would be success. And that would be all well and good, but I don't have any like delusions or anything like that. I just want to keep making the things that I'm into. And I'd like to grow my audience and have more people be into what I'm into as well, and share that kind of stuff and be able to talk art with more people. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Well, Is there anything else that you wanted to share about It's a Horror Show, the date, or the series as a whole that I may have missed? Maybe discuss rewards for potential backers?
Yeah. So for this Kickstarter, what we're doing is there'll be a physical copy of It's a Horror Show, the date, which is kind of like the basic base level for rewards for the Kickstarter, and then we're going to be doing a reissue of issue 1 for which will be like the next kind of plateau up for backers, and that I've included a brand new short story that's going to be in issue 1 to kind of give somebody, more readers something interesting. If they already have issue 1, there's another reason to rebuy it because printing number 2 has a new short story in it. I'll have a couple of different variant covers that I'm working on right now that are not all the way done, but they'll be done. It'll get there. So there'll be some cool variant covers. I think Mark and I are trying to do some cool stuff. I kind of pitched the idea to him of trying to do like an It's a Horror Show popcorn bag, because I think that'd be really fun.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're working on something like that, and we're also working on like in the book, the main character, the werewolf, who doesn't have a name. He's nameless. I kept it there because I like the kind of spaghetti western where you have the nameless hero, and I wanted to keep him nameless. So our werewolf hero, he's in a punk band, and so I thought it'd be cool too to have It's a Horror Show guitar picks, and so like that'll be a part of the rewards, as well as some different like promotional stuff that I think would just be fun and goofy to kind of like include, that are kind of about the story in a way. Yeah, I mean, It's a Horror Show, the date is a lot of fun. I had a really great time making it. I think that it's, every book I make, I think I get a little bit better. Things, my writing gets better, the art gets better, all that kind of stuff. And so to date, this I think is my best work. And I think there's some really great surprises in it. There's a lot of just fun stuff for horror fans and for punk music fans and all that kind of stuff. I that's kind of how Mark and I actually, started getting to know each other, is through Instagram, but then we were both in punk bands, in our earlier years. And so we kind of bonded over punk rock and stuff like that. And so now I'm making this story. And so a lot of it too is also now for Mark, because I think it's to make Mark laugh and adding little jokes about like the lead singer and stuff like that. Because Mark used to be a lead singer. And so there's a lot of jokes that are in there for people who are in bands and yeah, just fans of the genre in general.
I mean, I don't want to add any pressure onto you or make you feel like you have to do these two ideas, but I think maybe like a music poster, since the werewolf's supposed to be a musician. I think that would be pretty cool.
That would be,
or like
yeah,
maybe a
like the show poster.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. That's a super
or like
cool idea.
Maybe a ticket stub, since you have to pick, and then like maybe a mock-up, well, not a mock-up, but like a VHS.
Oh yeah.
What you call it? Tape sleeve, something like that.
Yeah,
Maybe that'd be pretty cool too. It's like an old horror campy poster. Like it would be the same as maybe like a movie poster, but then you would put it on the sleeve.
I gotta write it down. Both. I think all those ideas are rad. Like I like the idea of the show poster a lot. And I think it's funny too, because I used to, being in a band, you wear so many hats when you're just doing it all yourself, and I used to have to be the person to do the show posters. We're like, oh Jade, you're in art school, you should do the posters. It's like, cool, thanks for volunteering more work. Yeah.
Or like, since you like vinyl records, you can do like a vinyl sleeve.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I went to school for graphic design, and I had to do the same stuff, like mock up of like the wine for wine bottles and logos, and so my mind just went straight to different ideas for you. Like I said, I don't mean to volunteer you to do more work. It's just ideas that came into my head.
No, I totally dig it. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. No, I mean, at this point, I kind of need to do that stuff. Like, that's the part of the Kickstarter stuff that I'm so bad at. I'm like, I have the book. Is that enough? No. Okay. Well, we keep coming up with stuff. So no, that's perfect, because that gives me a lot of ideas of what to kind of like maybe shoot for and do some different stuff. Mark and I had talked about doing some like postcard designs, and so I think some of these would translate really well to doing like a postcard of the kind of VHS sleeve. Mm-hmm. I think that'd be sick. That'd be so cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank the comic creator and artist of the It's a Horror Show comic series, Jade Lowder, for joining us here today to promote the Kickstarter for the comic second issue, It's a Horror Show, The Date. I highly recommend our listeners to give the It's a Horror Show, The Date Kickstarter a look, share, and back if they can. All of Jade's socials, Patreon, and Kickstarter will be listed in this episode's details for those who are interested. And again, I am KS Garner, and you've been listening to the Solo Nerd Podcast. Thank you.